Tennessee Capitol Report is made possible in part by
Some games aren't played for glory. Some are played for more important reasons. That's why we partner with schools to re-energize physical education with Shape the State.
And with support by the following members of the Tennessee Credit Union League. With additional corporate support from AT&T, Rethink Possible.
Welcome to Tennessee Capitol Report. I'm Chip Hoback, and we're coming to you from Tennessee's historic capital in Nashville. On today's show, we're going to unravel the mystery of the state budget process. Tennessee's annual budget is around $33 billion, and it's your money. Where does it go in state government, and who decides how to spend it? We'll talk to State Budget Director David Thurman to hear how the governor proposes a budget. And then we'll meet the powerful chairman of the House and Senate Finance Committees, Representative Charles Sargent and Senator Randy McNally. And then we'll dig a little deeper into the budget details with Senator Bo Watson and Representative Mike Harrison. It's a process that's months in the making, so let's take a look at samples of budget hearings, where legislators first listen to testimonies regarding spending priorities.
And we must be responsible and do the responsible thing in order to present a balanced budget as we're constitutionally required to do.
I'm Justin Wilson. I'm your beloved comptroller, and I'm here to talk about the budget challenge that you have each and every year. Where does the money come from? 45% state dollars, 40% is federal funds, 15% is other things, primarily tuition. And what do we do with that money? Well, if you look at it collectively and just break it down, if you take TennCare and education and human services and health services, you got 3/4 of your money.
Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam also listens to months of agency testimonies before he proposes the budget in his State of the State address. So it's a really long process. Joining me now is State Budget Director David Thurman. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's a long process before it even gets to the State of the State, and that's where you're involved, right?
Yes, and it's a very long process. For us, it actually begins in August, which is 11 months prior to the budget going into effect. And at that point, we will issue instructions out to agencies based on what we think revenue is going to be for the upcoming year, 18 months in advance, and what we think expenditures are going to be. And at that point, we ask agencies to tell us kind of the framework of how we want them to build the budget. And this past year, we asked them to, as part of that process, to show us what a 7% reduction would look like.
Now, a 7% reduction is something I want to get into in a minute, but first of all, I want to get a little bit more about your background, because not only now you're working with the governor's office, before you were up here down the hall from us. Tell us about your background working with the legislature.
Well, for 14 years, I was here in the Legislative Budget Office, and for 6 years of those 14, I was the Legislative Budget Office, so I got to help build the budget from this side.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a long time to be involved in this process, so you basically you definitely understand that. What has changed over those 14 years since you've been in here?
I think what's changed the most is our revenue situation. For the past 8 years, we have had to, there's a commitment from both sides to live within our means, and to do that, we've had to make reductions for 8 years in a row, and that's not easy to do. Right.
We proposed a 7% decrease. How do you get that information out to the different people involved? Because there's, how many different budget items are there on there that you have to cut 7%?
Well, we asked for 7%. We didn't cut 7%. Right. It's a big difference.
It's a proposal, right?
It is a request to show us what it looks like. Okay. Because as we move along, it's part of one of the pieces of information that we have as we move along through the budget process. As we move along, we'll also look at revenues to kind of see what they look like, and we really don't have a good look at that until December. And so again, this is an ask that we have in August with agencies. And then also we don't know what kind of cost increases we're going to be dealing with either. So those are kind of the pieces that we're moving along as well. And so all that kind of begins in August, as I said, and then as we do that, we try and figure out what do we need to balance in terms of reductions, and we'll look at those individually. It's not across the board reduction at all. It's really a surgical adjustment that we make.
So it sounds like there's a lot of moving pieces to the budget over the time that you deal with it. Once it gets to the legislature, are you done?
Definitely not done. When we present the budget in usually 1st of February, that's usually that is our initial proposal, and as the General Assembly works through their process, they conduct their hearings. We'll also be looking at additional information in terms of revenues, in terms of other expenditures. Again, trying to make sure that we always stay in balance. Before the budget starts to move in the legislative process, we will propose adjustments to the governor's initial recommendation as a kind of a starting point for the legislature to make their adjustments.
Well, as far as the governor goes, I'm sure he's got his pet projects and his favorite things that he wants to accomplish while he's in office. I guess the thing we've been hearing the most about is education. Has that been the focus for this budget?
Absolutely. You know, there's several different criteria, I think, that is emphasized to us as we build the budget. One, it has to be balanced. And so that's always in our mind as we work through different issues. Education is definitely an area he wants to make investments in, also in economic development, and then making sure TennCare continues to grow in education in terms of fully funding the BEP.
There's mainly three major parts of the budget. We have the state, we have the federal, and we have the revenue that's generated by other departments. Explain a little bit about that breakdown.
Total budget's $33 billion. About half of that is federal funding, and that comes to us, I guess maybe 70% of that is probably in the TennCare program. State dollars, general fund taxes is about 14 or 15, and the difference comes from departmental revenues.
Aside from the things that are detailed out in the budget, what are some of the other priorities that the governor wanted to emphasize? Well,
another priority is definitely to build up our rainy day fund. Back in 2008, we had to look at it pretty heavily to balance our budget. We depleted it quite a bit, and so there's been a great emphasis to continue to build that up since then, and I think it's been almost doubled since he came into office, about $260 million.
What is that used for?
Rainy days? Yeah, well, it is, and it's hard to define a rainy day. But what we use it for is in years when we miss our revenue estimate. That's one place that we'll look. But also, if there's additional expenditures that we did not anticipate having in that fiscal year to help us close, we'll look at it as well.
State Budget Director David Thurman's been our guest. Thank you for taking the time to join us. The 109th General Assembly will enact a budget in the coming weeks, and casting votes will be 7 freshman senators and 16 newcomers in the House. That's roughly 16 to 20% of the votes in the respective chambers. Our cameras were rolling earlier this week to meet a sampling of the new faces on Capitol Hill.
Running for office was a dream come true for many freshman legislators, like immigrant and surgeon Sabi Kumar of Robertson County, who expressed his awe of becoming a member of the 109th General Assembly.
The first time we arrived, we were invited to come and take a tour. I came with my wife. It was an overwhelming, yet it was a very fulfilling experience. Walking through these tremendous halls, the tunnel, the marble all around, and the elegance of the chamber itself. When I saw my name on one of the desks, and I saw my name on the election board, I am taking on a responsibility to advocate for my constituents.
Senator Jackson, you're recognized. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a Senate Bill 651. It's an electronic driver's license bill. The first time I drove in, I was awestruck. I was by myself in my car, and there was the Capitol building that's over 150 years old. And I thought, I can't believe I'm going to be working in that building. That's when it really hit me that this is an unbelievable job. Not many people get to do it. And then I walk in the Senate chamber, and you see that beautiful Senate chamber, and there are only 33 people that get to work in there. And I'm just humbled.
The day after the election, actually, I came and walked into the chamber and brought my 6-year-old son with me. And my son was playing with every microphone in the building and trying to grab the lieutenant governor's gavel. But it was a special moment for me, especially after a long campaign where I hadn't been able to be with my son that much, to be there with him and to take in the history of that place. I mean, there's a lot of things that have happened in that chamber over the years, and it's always one thing to talk about it from the outside, but to then become part of it, I think you take that responsibility much more seriously.
Our next guests are anything but newcomers to state government. Senator Randy McNally of Oak Ridge has served in the Tennessee House and Senate since 1978. And Charles Sargent, a native of New York, has represented Franklin, Tennessee in the House for the past 18 years. Both are chairmen of the powerful Finance, Ways and Means committees in their respective chambers. Welcome, gentlemen, to Tennessee Capitol Report, and thank you for taking the time today.
Glad to be here with you.
Let's start with you, Representative Charles Sargent. We want to get a basic understanding of the budget process and how that works for somebody who might not know. This is a process that started a long time ago, and you work up over the months to get to this point where you're getting ready to vote on the budget. How does that work?
Well, the governor brings us his budget normally the first week of February. The first Monday of February, the governor will give us his budget, do a State of the State address, and then we'll get that budget. We'll start going through the budget very thoroughly we'll have budget hearings. We'll have every commissioner and every department, about 53 budget hearings throughout the first month after he gives us an overview. And then we'll go through that and make priorities or cuts. We normally don't make that many cuts, but we may have some things that we want to add into the budget that he has either taken out or left out of the budget.
So you represent the House, you represent the Senate. How does it work between the House and the Senate?
The process is a little bit different. As Charles mentioned, the governor presents his budget usually the first Monday in February. Then we have a generalized hearing on the budget and farm the individual pieces out to the standing committees. For example, safety would get the Highway Patrol and TBI and other agencies. Transportation, of course, would get the TDOT. And then they have hearings and they bring their recommendations back to us in the form of an amendment. And then later in the year, when the governor presents his amendment to the budget or his supplementary amendment, we'll take that up first, and then the individual committee amendments, and then individual members' amendments.
So when it comes to you from the governor's office, that's a proposal, and then you're going through the situation and they've asked for a 7% cut. So how do you determine which parts of the budget get cut and which parts of the budget that may be asking for more money?
Well, he has already proposed a 7% cut in his budget. Then if we think there's going to be additional funding, we'll go back and say, our priority is not to cut this line item and not to cut that line item. So we go back and forth with the administration to, let them know where we stand and what we're looking at.
And how do you determine that?
Well, after the budget hearings, we go through the entire budget hearings through all the departments, and at that time, you'll find out we may want to do a meth cleanup where the governor's taken out of his budget, but most of the people on that committee thinks that that's a very important line item, so we'll put it back in into the budget and see if the governor will fund it.
Now, you mentioned priorities earlier. What are some of the priorities that we can be looking for in this budget?
Well, I think there's some areas in mental health, particularly the cuts in level 2. And as Charles mentioned, we're working with the administration because there does appear to be a little more revenue than we thought back in December. Things have picked up, but then on the other side, this is the budget for next year, and I noticed where the federal government has actually lowered their growth expectations down to 2.5%, and also housing starts are down. So there's some concern out there that the recovery really it's anemic, to say the best. And while we're seeing unemployment numbers drop, the number of people employed is way below what it was pre-recession.
And that's because people that haven't had jobs and have rolled off the financing that they get from unemployment don't show up in those numbers?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, Let's talk about education. That always seems to be a priority. The governor mentioned that in his inauguration and in the State of the State. What kind of funding can we expect from education, and what process are you going through with that right now?
The governor has always done an excellent job in education. He tries to fully fund education every year. As you know, this year there's going to be a 4% pay raise for all our teachers. And of course, last year we did not give a pay raise. So normally you're looking at a 1%, 2%, or 3%. This year it's going to be a 4% pay raise to all the teachers. I think most of the House members are all for education initiatives that he's putting forth. And so I don't think that would be a problem, as far as the funding of the education bill. Because we always fund, some people are looking at the growth BEP money, that we may need to fund that a little more than what we are. But other than that, I think people are fairly well happy with the governor's education plan.
I guess one of the issues that you have to deal with is that you have a balanced budget every year, and that's the goal every year. So is that difficult to prepare for?
Normally speaking, you go by trends. As this year, our sales tax collections are up and our franchise excise tax is up. Those are our two biggest tax collections we have. They make up probably about 77% of our entire revenue, just those two line items. So we have to be very careful, especially when it comes to franchise excise tax, that we're not counting money that we're going to get one time from a company compared to what we're going to get annually from a company.
What kind of surprises can we expect, if any, from this year's budget?
Well, I don't think there'll be a lot of changes. And regarding the prediction of revenue, Matt Murray over at UT, an economist, told me once that trying to make revenue predictions were a lot like driving your car using only the rear view mirror. And so we'll try to err on the conservative side as far as revenue projections for the future. And I think that, we'll do some adjusting in some of the cuts that have been made. And if there is additional revenue, I think, as we have in the past, the Republican leadership in the House and Senate will look towards tax relief.
Representative Charles Sargent and Senator Randy McNally have been our guests. Thank you for taking the time to explain that to us, and hopefully it makes the budget process a lot easier for everybody else to understand. You helped me a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It takes years of experience to effectively chair a legislative committee and shape the state's budget. So how long does it take for a freshman legislator to start making a contribution in this process? Let's go back to our story about some of the impressive newcomers on Capitol Hill.
Senator Jackson of Madison, you're recognized on Senate Bill 87.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate this. First time to present a bill, so I think everybody's aware of that. So I know it'll be a lot of fun. When my first bill passed, I had a lot of nerves going on because I had been pre-warned that there was freshman hazing that goes on when you're on the Senate floor. So I read the bill, presented it, and then that's when the hazing started. They started asking some questions that they try to trip you up.
Was this amendment considered by the Education Committee?
Jackson?
This was not, or make you not be able to think. And everybody stood up and clapped when it was all over with.
Mr. Clerk, take a vote.
Ayes 33, no nays.
Bill 87, Henry City Constitution majority hereby adopted without objection. Motion to reconsider goes to table.
There's something special about the first day when you actually raise your hand and take the oath of office. It really does mark an end to the campaign and a beginning of governing.
Senator Bailey.
Being a new person in the Senate, a freshman, requires you to be on the bottom hill of a lot of learning curves all at once. You have to learn how things work, then you have to learn how they really work. But there's not really a lengthy formal training, so you really are jumping, learning a lot by getting thrown in the deep end sometimes.
A fascinating look behind the scenes here at the 109th General Assembly. Our next guests are here to take us a little deeper into the behind the scenes of the state budget. Rogersville Representative Mike Harrison and Senator Bo Watson from Hamilton County. Thank you for taking the time to join us on the Tennessee Capitol Report.
Pleasure.
Glad to be here.
Now, we want to talk a little bit about the detail of the process and how you guys are involved in the budget. When do you first start seeing the items that come in there? Talk about cuts. Let's start with you. Where are we in the budget process right now?
Of course, back in late January, early February, we get the budget from the governor. At that point, we will start having budget hearings from all the different departments. Right now, we're starting to see the bills coming through finance that have a fiscal note that costs money, obviously. So we're processing through all those bills right now. Of course, the ones that cost the budget money, we'll be putting them behind the budget. And at some point in time, when we get to the end, after we pass the budget, we'll take a look at those bills with the Senate.
Okay. And what's your role in the process here?
Well, Representative Harrison and I, we sort of are the people who start to get talked to about this time when people have things they want in the budget that may not be there. We will primarily deal with an amendment that will go to the budget that will fund some things that maybe weren't originally in the governor's first budget plan. And then members will have specific pieces of legislation or items that they're interested in. And Representative Harrison and I sort of work that out between the House and the Senate. Sometimes what the Senate thinks ought to be in the budget isn't exactly what the House thinks ought to be in the budget. And then sometimes what they think should be in the budget, we almost always agree with them. It's amazing how the Senate works so well with the House.
That's exactly the way it works.
And of course, then there's a 7% cut that's been asked for here, and I guess a lot of people are jockeying back and forth for those budget items to get their part financed. How much pressure is there involved in getting the money to the right place?
Well, most of the cuts are in the governor's budget. Right now, in the House, this Thursday, members that have special, as Senator Watson said, things that didn't end up in the budget, we'll give members an opportunity to file budget amendments. Thursday's the deadline for that, and probably one day next week those members will come before budget sub and make their best case why those amendments should end up in the budget.
Yeah, a lot of the cuts, Senator Harrison and Representative Harrison and I will work out because members will try and restore some of those cuts, either fully or partially. And when the governor brings his amendment, his administration amendment, some of those cuts may be restored with his amendment. The first blush at the budget, the first budget that we get is really just the guidelines are where we're going. The next budget, the budget amendment, where Representative Harrison and I and others in leadership really carve out what the final budget product's going to look like.
Is there anything that's kind of controversial this time in the budget where people are asking for more funding than they have in the past, or what are some of the key issues you're looking at in this budget?
Well, I mean, anytime you make reductions to the budget, it gets controversial. You know, it depends on whose ox is getting gored. This budget's not unlike the budgets that we've been through in the past. I mean, we live in a very conservative, fiscally conservative state, and so we don't have a lot of excess, even in our best years. The governor puts forth his best pitch, and then we start taking swings at it through the committee process. Obviously, you've got things like employee longevity pay. You've got some reductions in various departments that the legislature is going through the process now of vetting and deciding which one of those we want to keep, which one of those we think we should be able to fund and ultimately will fund. I mean, the separation of powers, the governor only suggests the budget. It's the legislature that actually passes the budget and provides the appropriations for the governor to spend the money.
Well, when you saw the inauguration speech and you saw the State of the State speech by the governor, education's a priority. What about the funding for education?
Funding, of course, one of the issues with education right now, especially this week, is the vouchers bill that's going through. The governor had a bill last year that didn't make it. I think it's cleared the Senate Education Committee. It's in full education in the House this week, and of course that's going to be a big issue as far as the budget coming up.
Education is the biggest thing that we do. I mean, it's 45% of our overall budget. So it doesn't matter how much money we have, we always spend about 45% of it on education. That's followed by healthcare. Unfortunately, healthcare is starting to crowd out a lot of the other things that we'd like to do in the budget. But even during the recession, Tennessee was one of only 2 states that maintained our education funding at the same level. We didn't cut it at all. This administration, and particularly this legislature, has been very committed to funding education to the best of our ability. The challenge that we have in Tennessee is that we're not a wealthy state. We're kind of a middle-class state, maybe even a lower middle-class state. And so we have to be very careful with every penny that we spend. Education always wants and needs more money. There's only so much money to provide, and when you're giving almost 50% of it to education, then your commitment to education is pretty strong.
All right, Representative Mike Harrison, Senator Bo Watson have been our guests. Thanks for taking the time to join us on Tennessee Capitol Report. Thank you. Well, that's our show for today. We hope you found it to be informative. Tennessee's budget for the next fiscal year will be hammered out in the coming weeks by the 109th General Assembly, and we'll be here to offer you more insight into the legislative process. We'll see you next time on Tennessee Capitol Report. I'm Chip Hoback.
Tennessee Capitol Report is made possible in part by...
Some games aren't played for glory. Some are played for more important reasons. That's why we partner with schools to re-energize physical education with Shape the State.
And with support by the following members of the Tennessee Credit Union League. With additional corporate support from AT&T, Rethink Possible.